And good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Now TV. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And if you haven't been watching my regular morning musings, then you will notice that I've got a completely different background. I've got a completely different setting. And pardon me, it's certainly not the way it's going to be finalized. I think I'm going to put this bookshelf right here, there. I think I'm going to put that back here behind me when and put the books on it so that it will be a library background, and put this smaller. Well, that's really difficult to do. That little smaller, shorter bookshelf back off over here, perhaps. But anyway, we've got some moving around yet to do. I've got to get a little floor rug to cut down on the reverberations that we're getting right now. And yet, boy, I'm really excited. I just love my new office. And it's just very, very exciting. So again, I want to thank you for joining me here on Now TV. We come to you at 9:30 about every Saturday morning. You can find us, and there's all sorts of archived programs, and you can go back and watch, because we've been doing an extensive study on the challenge of Christ. The challenge of Christ is, as I pointed out in our previous program, hope you have it memorized by now, okay? The challenge of Christ is, from Jesus himself, if I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me. And listen, folks, as I said last week, it's so disappointing, somewhat discouraging, when you realize that so many Christians are not even aware of Jesus' challenge. Not only are they not aware of it, they don't have a clue in the world how to answer it. That's distressing. And so what I'm trying to do here on Now TV is to equip as many believers who are willing to take the message to heart, do some study, do some research, do some reading, and to be able to answer the challenge of Christ. Now, I've been sharing with you for a good little while now about the book of Revelation, because everyone seems to want to run to the book of Revelation. And they just say, oh, this is it. We are waiting on the imminent end. I mean, the end is near. And here we are, a couple of months removed now, maybe not quite 2 months, from the 5 red heifers that have been sent over to Israel. I don't know about you, but in one of the pictures of the red heifers that they took, and remember, a red heifer has to be absolutely, totally flawless, spotless, with no white hairs, no gray hairs, no black hairs. Well, in one of the pictures, one of the hairs, or actually it was a little strand of hair in the ear of one of those little red heifers, was clearly not as dark red as the rest of the heifer. And I thought, well, there goes that one, which is the way it ought to be, by the way. Yeah, I'm getting my office completely set up now. Boy, it's great to be able to have my coffee set up again and what have you. And boy, it's been a journey. It really is. So I'll set that aside, let it get a little bit cool while I do the program. All right. So over the last couple of weeks, I've shared with you the significance of the term that is found in Revelation chapter 1 and verse 3. Blessed is he who reads, understands, and keeps the words of this prophecy, because the time has drawn near. The word time is from the Greek word kairos. Kairos, now look, there are exceptions to it. I'm not disputing that, not denying that in any shape, form, or fashion. But the word kairos, as Trench in his synonyms of the New Testament, he examines the Greek word chronos. Chronos is just linear time. Now, it can be used in a limited time if the writer, in a given context, designates limitations to the time, but when that's done, more commonly, the word is kairos. Kairos is used to speak of the 4 seasons, the 4 times of the year. You know, you got the summer, winter, or summer, fall, winter, spring, etc., etc. And that goes back all the way to Genesis chapter 1, in which God appointed the sun, the moon, the stars to be for times, for seasons, for days, for weeks, for months, and for years. And in the original Hebrew, the Hebrew scholars tell me that language that is used there refers, really, it's festal language to refer to the appointed times of Israel's feast days. Boy, that's significant. Now, I am not by that saying that Genesis chapter 1 refers to the creation of Israel. I'm simply saying that the language there is used at a later period of time to refer to Israel's appointed feast days, the times and seasons. Well, what I've been sharing with you is that this term, kairos, is highly, highly significant when we study eschatology. I've shared with you that in 1 Peter chapter 1, 10 and following, Peter was talking about the fact that his audience, the diaspora, was in the process of receiving the telos, the end goal of their faith, which was the salvation of their soul. Concerning which salvation the prophets, that's the Old Covenant prophets, have inquired and searched diligently to know the time and the manner of the things which they predicted. Now, I suggested to you that this is incredibly important. The Old Testament prophets sought to know the manner of the fulfillment of their prophecies. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if temple meant automatically temple, and if land meant land, and if priesthood meant priesthood, and if sacrifice meant sacrifice, then why did the prophets search diligently to know the manner of the fulfillment of their prophecies when they spoke of the return to the land, the temple, the city, the priesthood, the sacrifices? I mean, after all, everybody knows what land is, don't they? Everyone knew what Jerusalem or temple meant, didn't they? And yet, as I shared with you, Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 5 and 6, and remember, he's writing to the diaspora. He's writing about the faith, the eschatological hope of Israel. And he says, you therefore, that's the diaspora who have come to accept Jesus, are being built up a spiritual house to offer up spiritual sacrifices, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices, wholly acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Now look, he is echoing Hosea chapter 3, verse 5 and following, that said Israel, that's the diaspora, Israel would be many days, in other words, a long time, without ephod, without altar, without priesthood, in other words, without temple, until the last days when they would serve David, i.e. the Messiah, actually, in the kingdom. So here's Peter writing to the diaspora about their eschatological hopes, citing Hosea chapter 3, verse 5, that said in the last days, the house of God would be established and be built. And yet Peter interprets that spiritually of the house of God, the church of the living God. It's little wonder that the Old Testament prophets searched diligently to understand the manner of the fulfillment. Now remember, Peter said, speaking of those Old Testament prophets, to whom it was revealed that not to themselves did they minister those things. So, The Old Testament prophets were told that the events of the Messiah, the kingdom, the last days, were not for their days. Remember Hosea chapter 3, verse 5? Israel is going to be many days without a king, without an ephod. And by the way, that ephod refers to revelation from God. It meant they were going to be a long time without a prophet. Well, interestingly enough, from the appearance of the book of Malachi, and let's date it, let's say 450 years before the coming of Jesus, the Jews believed that Malachi was the very last inspired book. And they were waiting for, and by the way, they believed that the Holy Spirit had been withdrawn from Israel insofar as the prophetic office was concerned. And they were waiting for the coming of the last days in which the Spirit would be poured out once again on Israel. Their sons and daughters would prophesy, etc., etc., Joel chapter 2. But remember, they were told they would be many days without the ephod, without the revelation from God. So from 450 AD until the appearance of John the Baptizer, Israel really was without a prophet. It's really interesting to me that during the intertestamental period of time, John Hyrcanus, who was able to restore Jerusalem to a certain extent, they took the vessels that they had recaptured from the Syrians under Antiochus Epiphanes and his later forces. John Hyrcanus said, we're going to put them aside. We're going to store them away in a safe place until a prophet arises in Israel to tell them what to do with those vessels. Now look, Daniel chapter 9 said that that 70 weeks are determined upon your people to seal vision and prophecy. Oh, wait a minute. Daniel is foretelling a time in which vision and prophecy, in other words, the prophetic office, would be revealed or be opened up, be active once again, but the 70 weeks would put a termination to the office, to the prophetic office of revelation from God. You need to get a copy of my book, Seal Up Vision and Prophecy. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. In that book, I demonstrate without any shadow of a doubt, scholars across the spectrum, doesn't matter if they're dispensational, amillennial, postmillennial, they all agree that to seal vision and prophecy meant to bring the prophetic office to a complete end through the fulfillment of all prophecy. And that would happen by the end of the 70 weeks. The end of the 70 weeks was in AD 70. So that meant, since the Holy Spirit was to be poured out in the last days, okay, and guess what? That meant the prophetic office would function once again. But it wouldn't function again until the last days, and John the Baptizer was a prophet of God. So guess what? That meant the last days were initiated through the giving of the Holy Spirit to John as a revival of the prophetic office. Do you catch the power of that, folks? This is incredible. And it absolutely falsifies the claim that the last days are, in fact, the Christian age. John never lived in the Christian age. Not once. And yet he received the Holy Spirit to revive the prophetic office, which again, Joel predicted would happen in the last days. That Hosea chapter 3 and verse 5 said, Israel would be without the ephod, without the revelatory office until the last days. John received the revelatory gift of the Holy Spirit, meaning he lived in the last days. So to reiterate, guess what? That means the last days did not begin on Pentecost. They began with the appearance of John the Baptizer. Now, I've got to hurry, but I had to go back over that territory so that we understand the Old Testament prophets, point number one, did not understand their own prophecies. Well, I just got to throw this in there. Daniel chapter 10, Daniel saw the prophecy that spanned the time from when he was alive all the way until the time of Rome. And he said, Daniel chapter 10, verse 4, verse 14, I saw the vision, but I didn't understand. But the angel was sent to reveal it to me so that I could sort of kind of understand it. But in Daniel chapter 12, verses 4 through 10, Daniel once again says, I heard the vision, but I did not understand. But he was told, Daniel, seal up the vision until the, watch this, time, kairos, of the end. Eskatu, kairu, the last appointed time. You see the significance of that? So Daniel was told, Daniel, seal up the book because it's a long time off. Daniel chapter 12, 9 and following. So twice Daniel was told the fulfillment of his vision, the vision of the abomination of desolation, the vision of the great tribulation, the vision of the time of the end, the vision of the resurrection were not for his days. They were far off. Hey, for all the folks who say God doesn't tell time like we do, and who say, well, yeah, you know, when God said something was at hand and coming quickly and shortly, that might mean 2,000 or 3,000 years. Well, wait a minute. If at hand can mean a long time, as far as man is concerned, what does not at hand, what does a long time mean? Are you going to tell us at hand, quickly, shortly, and soon means a long time, and a long time also means a long time? That's nonsensical. Okay, so I've got to move on. But I just had to cover some of this so that we understand the significance of 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 9 and following, in which Peter tells us the Old Testament prophets did not understand the time or the manner of the fulfillment of their prophecies. Now, we knew this, or they knew this. Pardon me. They knew the time in this regard. As we've already seen from Hosea chapter 3 and verse 5, they knew the fulfillment of their prophecy would be in, quote, the last days. Whatever that term might be. Okay? But they were given this. And now last week, I began sharing with you some of the Old Testament prophecies that use the word kairos, the appointed time. I want to backtrack just a little bit now. I'm going to go to Deuteronomy chapter 32, 19 to 21. Deuteronomy 32, 30 and 31. The Song of Moses, ladies and gentlemen, is a song and a prediction of Israel's last days. Now in Deuteronomy chapter 31, 29 and following, Moses said, I know that after my departure, my death, you will become utterly corrupt, and evil will befall you in the last days. Eskatu hemeron, last days. So here is Moses in the preamble, in the introduction to the Song of Moses, telling Israel that Yahweh was revealing to him. He knew Israel was going to apostatize in the last days. And as a result of her apostasy in the last days, God was going to bring judgment on her in the last days. Now look, folks, Moses knew he was not living in the last days. Never in any of the writings from Moses is it ever suggested that he was living in the last days. Not one time. Matter of fact, Moses tells us in Deuteronomy 32, 5 and following, that in the many generations to come, the children of Israel would look back on the Song of Moses and say, tell us what this means. So, after many generations to come, what are we told? Israel would say, what does this song mean for us? Well, twice in the text we are told, oh, that they were wise. Oh, that they would learn. Oh, that they would know what their last end will be. Deuteronomy 32, 19 to 21. Again, Deuteronomy 32, 30 through 32. Oh, that they were wise. Oh, that they would consider what their last end shall be. Hey, do you think you're talking about the last days? Well, I know this. In Deuteronomy chapter 32 and verse 43, and remember, we're talking about Israel's last time, Israel's last days. Rejoice, O Gentiles, with his people, for he has avenged the blood of his saints. When was the blood of the saints to be vindicated? Oh, in the last days, Isaiah chapter 2, verse 2 and following. At the day of the Lord, Isaiah chapter 2, 9 through 11, Isaiah 2, 19 to 21, when the Lord would purge the blood guilt of Israel through the spirit of judgment and fire, Isaiah chapter 4, verse 4. So when was the blood guilt of Israel supposed to be avenged? In the last days, at the day of the Lord. You see how that works? Deuteronomy chapter 32, in Israel's last days, the Lord would avenge the blood of the martyrs. In the last days, God would avenge the blood of the martyrs. So it would be in Israel's last days that the blood of the martyrs would be avenged, i.e. in the last days. Not the last days of time. In Israel's last days. Now then, what we have here then is the statement of the identity of a time. An appointed time for God to bring his scheme of redemption to its consummation. Now, Deuteronomy 32 sets the stage for that. And what I shared with you last week was that no other book in all of the Old Testament uses the word kairos. Now, kairos in the Septuagint occurs many, many times in eschatological context, speaking of the last days. Okay? And so this is really, really important, ladies and gentlemen. But again, let me drive this point home. Nowhere in the Old Testament does a single prophet say they were living in the appointed time of the end and the day of the Lord. Now, the closest to it comes in Ezekiel chapter 7, in which the Lord said, speaking of the impending destruction of Jerusalem at the hand of the Babylonians, the day of the Lord is at hand. It is near, it is coming soon, it is coming shortly, it is coming quickly. The time is at hand. Well, guess what? God had appointed the time for the destruction of Jerusalem. But you know what? That was not the last days. That was not the last days in which the prophetic office was going to be revived. Jeremiah was a prophet. The office hadn't even ceased yet. And so it's important to follow the narrative, so to speak. Follow the timeline. So once again, almost out of time already, once again, no other book uses the term kairos more effectively, more powerfully than the book of Daniel. I shared with you thoughts last week from Daniel chapter 2. I won't go over the totality of it, but let me simply remind you that Daniel foretold the time in the last days, Daniel 2 and verse 38, in which the God of heaven would set up a kingdom that would never ever be destroyed. It would be like a stone cut out without hands that would crush and destroy all other kingdoms. That means it would triumph over them. No matter what they tried to do to it, it was going to triumph. Now, the days of those kingdoms of that fourth empire was the days of Rome. That means that the last days had to be within the confines of the days of Rome. But remember, we have already seen how the last days refers not to the last days of a Roman Empire, not to the last days even of Babylonia or Persia or Greece. No. We have already seen that the prophetic office belonged to the last days of Israel. And that's extremely important. So Daniel chapter 2 gives us a time that was appointed, a time which is the fourth empire from Babylon. And in the days of the kings of the fourth empire, the God of heaven would set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. That means that the appointed day, the appointed time for the kingdom was the day in the days of Rome. By the way, I've just got to take a real brief digression here. Some people try to say that Daniel chapter 2 is all about the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, has nothing to do with the time of Jesus. And every time I've gotten into a conversation with somebody like this, I have asked them, okay, if Daniel chapter 2 is completely and totally about the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, then would you determine for me and establish for me, prove for me what everlasting kingdom cut out without hands, in other words, it's divine, and it's not like the other kingdoms of the world, meaning it's not a man-made kingdom. What kingdom cut out without hands as an everlasting kingdom that will never be destroyed? Tell me what kingdom like that was established in the days of Antiochus Epiphanes. Well, generally speaking, about that time, the individuals who take the Antiochus Epiphanes view say, well, you just don't understand. You just don't understand at all. Well, I know this. I know Daniel was told that in the days of the fourth kingdom, an everlasting kingdom that will never be destroyed would be established, and it would not be an earthly kingdom. That's what I understand. I also understand I'm completely and totally out of time. I'll see you next week.